All right, folks, let's start to find our seats. I've got two Tim. Let's bring him back in. All right, everyone. As we start to find our seats, I want to remind you, our next presentation is going to be about the nuclear materials specific infrastructure. When we talk infrastructure, there's usually two different types, right? We have the general site infrastructure that's paid for overall. You see your roads, bridges, sewers, things like that. But then there's programmatic specific infrastructure. And so we're going to focus in today on that nuclear materials program, specific infrastructure. And Nick Miller's here to do that for us. Ready, Nick?
Certainly. Good afternoon. Sorry about that. All right, Nick Miller. I'm the Deputy Vice President for EM Operations for Savannah River Nuclear Solutions. And unfortunately, my counterpart, Mr. Krabs, was unable to join us today, but he'll be here in spirit as we talk about nuclear materials infrastructure. All right, busy slide, but I wanted to start with some framework, kind of the footprint of the nuclear materials infrastructure facility-wise. And from that perspective, we really have 5 facilities we're talking about today: H, K, L, E, and F. And what you see here on the screen is really a roadmap of how material flows to the site. Predominantly, you've got L area still receiving FR and DR fuels. H Canyon is processing that material, and that's the primary disposition path for the material that comes on site through L area. All the material we now disposition from the canyon goes right to the liquid waste program. And happy to note we're actually doing our first ABD discards as of this month. K area has the plutonium processing activities going on today, and a majority of that material goes out to the WIP facility out west. And then solid waste is integral to all the operations that take place for those 5 facilities. When we talk infrastructure today, I want to make sure you're thinking about those 5 facilities in particular and the needs associated with those. All right, I will cover a couple in depth, just to give you some point of reference on what we're doing out here in these facilities. This is an aerial view of H area. You've got the H Canyon facility in the red box, and on the top of that red box, you've got HB line, which is currently in a layup facility, a layup mode, excuse me. And then to the right of that, on the right side of the screen, you've got a bunch of support facilities. You've got what we like to call outside facilities. It's a facility unto itself that has all the services that are required to really operate the canyon. And then surrounding the canyon, you've got a number of other administrative facilities. All told, you've got about 75 facilities that are required to facilitate operations in the canyon. And so again, keep that in mind as we get through the discussions today about infrastructure, the needs, not just the nuclear facilities, but all the infrastructure supporting all the administrative activities that happen outside the building. This is another aerial of K area. A lot of things happening in K area right now, as I'm sure you're aware. As we ramp up downblending activities, moving from an S&M approach to an actual processing approach over the last couple of years. And that'll continue into the next decade as we stand up SPD, Surplus Plutonium Disposition Project. And you can note all the yellow boxes are new infrastructure, facilities, and other services and support services that are coming online or have come online. And then you've got the red boxes that will, our current forecast for additional support needed to stand up the necessary infrastructure services required to facilitate the processing activities we're doing in K area. And all told, you're looking at about 100 facilities supporting the K area mission. Overall, the mission requirements for these 5 facilities, I mentioned the Accelerated Basin Inventory Project. That's really where H and L are operating now. That mission change accelerated our ability to process material through the H Canyon facility in the neighborhood of 20 additional years. So all the material in L, the goal is to process as much material out of L through the H Canyon facility before liquid waste program shuts down. And the ABD mission greatly increased our chances of de-inventorying the L Basin facility as a result of that. L continues to receive foreign and domestic research reactor fuels. K area, as we mentioned, is still processing plutonium, and well into the 2050s is the plan. Once SPD gets up and running, we have quite a bit of material we'll be processing through K area over the course of the next 30 years. E area will be around long, well, not long, but after all the other facilities shut down. It's a burial ground. It's got to receive all our high and low level waste. It is a throughput for true waste. It makes its way out to the WIP facility. And so it's got to be present and available to support all the other facilities on site as its missions start up. For example, the PITS missions, as it gets going, E area will continue to support those kinds of needs. So that's really an enduring mission, and it'll be around for a while. So we need to support it from an infrastructure perspective. And then F area, the F Canyon facility went into a deactivated state in 2003. And we're in the process, as Mr. Budney mentioned, of deactivating the FH lab facilities that are in F complex. 235F is in deactivation mode, and we'll be moving towards decommissioning. But all those facilities over time will require additional investment to decommission. In the interim, we're obligated to keep them in a safe operating posture. So although there aren't any missions happening, we're still doing surveillance and maintenance activities there, and we need to manage the facilities accordingly to make sure that we operate them safely. So I'm sure you all know the facilities that I just mentioned. A bulk of them are 1950s vintage. Okay, a couple of separation facilities, reactor facilities. And over the years, we've upgraded the infrastructure within those facilities. But overall, the average age of the equipment, systems, components within our facilities is about 34 years old. So as you can imagine, that's not young. It still requires some additional investment year over year to make sure that we're maintaining our operability with the systems that we're talking about. About half of our equipment is half of our systems require some form of investment. So that means the other half doesn't. But at least at any given time, we've got about 50% of our systems require some investment with respect to infrastructure to modernize them, to keep them from obsolescence. And so that's really why we're here today, is to kind of walk you through how we do that, how we prioritize the things that we do when it comes to infrastructure, when faced with aging facilities. And every year that goes by, the infrastructure need slightly goes up year over year as the facilities age. So I want to give you some practical examples of some of the things that we're doing at the site that are infrastructure specific. For anybody who's been out to the canyon knows that the facility can't operate without its cranes. It has 2 cranes, one on the hot side, one on the warm side, and we operate those cranes remotely in a crane control room using camera systems. One of the misnomers I like to address during the tours I provide, new hot crane, new warm crane. Those are the designators for the cranes. There actually is an old hot crane still in the building, and believe it or not, the new cranes, when you think new, you probably think 5-10 years old. Well, the reality is the new hot crane and the new warm crane are actually older than the cranes, the old cranes when we replace them. So to give you some perspective, they're 40 years old, and we call them new cranes just to differentiate them from the other cranes that are in the building. But those cranes are integral to our operations. We cannot operate. You can't go in the canyons. They're uninhabitable spaces. So all the work we do in the canyons is directly related to the crane work that we do. Got to have the cranes to operate them. Have to have cameras and radio frequency systems to be able to communicate with them. So over the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've been really ramping up our investment with respect to the cranes, making sure they're fully operational when we need them to, adding new cameras. This year, we're actually going after, as I mentioned, the radio frequency upgrades and the communications and electronics equipment upgrades for the crane control room equipment. The electrical distribution system out at the site is, especially for our 5 facilities, is always something we wind up having to spend some time and effort into. We're in the process of doing final designs for a transformer. Each of the reactor buildings have 4 transformer rooms, and we every handful of years have to go and basically modernize equipment in those rooms. We recently went through a very large project to upgrade the K&L reliability coming from Dominion down into our 13.8 kV feeders. And I'll talk to that in a minute, but that was a major improvement in infrastructure investment that we made over the last 6 or 7 years. And now we're in the process of hitting the individual facility electrical distribution system equipment. Another example is the 285H substation. This is a substation that's 65 years old. It is needed to support cooling water system operations in the canyon. And we're in the process of finalizing design and working towards getting that substation replaced. But that's, a $10 million or so lift. So it's not something you can do in any one given year. You've got to work it off over time. And this process that we go through to determine what infrastructure we need year to year, both investment and needs, promulgates interim actions. For example, we're in the process of building a portable substation that can be used in the event this substation goes down to provide the necessary mission support electrical feed to the building. We work in a lot of facilities that have, all our facilities are governed by regulations such as fire protection codes, things like that. And a lot of our missions, specifically where we work, also credit our fire protection detection suppression systems. And so we're constantly looking at ways to upgrade those systems, managing them, making sure that we're not stopping or impacting operations on a day-to-day basis based on the sensitivity of the equipment that comes with a fire detection system, for example. So roofs, we have in the neighborhood of $35 million of backlog that's needed to support our roof replacements, roof infrastructure. And just some examples on the screen. Typically, any given year, we have 2 or 3 roof projects ongoing in any one of these facilities, whether it be the actual nuclear facilities themselves or admin facilities. This last year, we just knocked out the disassembly roof on 105 Lima. So that's the L basin where all the fuel is stored in the disassembly basin. The roof of that structure was just resurfaced this past year. We work a lot of administrative buildings. Typically, they don't take as much priority, but they're still important to us. Obviously, we have a lot of our workforce that resides in these buildings, and so it's necessary to continually make sure the roof systems are operational. And on occasion, we get ourselves into a situation where we have water intrusion into a facility like the Canyon, H Canyon facility, and if you have water intrusion running through the facility, that's not good because more than likely it will find itself into a spot you don't want it to be in. We actually just resurfaced 3 sections of that roof out of 18 sections about 1.5 years, 2 years ago to address some water intrusion we were seeing, and it's been very effective. One of the things we like about roofs is they're shovel ready. One of the challenges I'll talk to at the end is, with respect to infrastructure, is you need designs. You can't just go buy stuff and replace it. A lot of our systems are very specific to the need. They're designed specific to that application. And over time, they become obsolescent, or the provider changes a part number or changes a system number, that kind of thing. And so a lot of our projects require design input. We have to go in and actually change the design to accommodate the need to upgrade the system. And so that just adds time and complexity to the overall effort. Roofs, on the other hand, don't require design typically. And so we like to have these on hand because they're obviously very much needed, but it's also a good balance with against some of the other things we like to do year over year with regards to resource availability. Okay, we've done a lot of work. I wanted to highlight some things that we've accomplished over the last couple of years, partnering with the department, making sure we had the right resources to support. Believe it or not, sometimes doors, simple roll-up doors are a challenge for us. I'll touch on the next slide. We've got a roll-up door that we replaced this year in H Canyon. That is the first point of entry for casks as they roll into the building. And it's a roll-up door that's 30 plus years old. It's not overly complex. It hasn't given us problems, but we've identified through our risk process if that door were to fail, it would affect our processing directly. We can't get fuel in and out of the building. So we went after that infrastructure upgrade here recently. The permissive switch, the control systems for our shielding doors, which is the next layer in to the canyon, was also something we upgraded here in the last year. Chillers has been a major focus for us at the site. As you can imagine, obviously, cool air and making our spaces habitable is very important to us and our workforce. About 2 years ago this month, we had both our chillers in the canyon fail, and these are pieces of equipment that did not rate out as high risk, need to address pieces of equipment. Less than 20 years old. We have a vendor who's highly capable of maintaining that equipment, and we had kept up on all our preventive maintenance and all that. But just so happenstance, both those chillers failed, and guess what month they failed in, or what season? You would need only one guess to find out when. So obviously they failed in the summer when they're most needed. We wound up instituting a portable cooling system, a pretty ingenious design by our engineering staff to basically build a plenum to blow cold air into the intake of the building to really make the space habitable for our employees. Over the course of the last about 3 months, we completely overhauled both those chillers and returned them to service. But that's the kind of scenario we want to avoid. We obviously don't want to have the equipment tell us what to do. We want to take the equipment down when we want to take it down, when it's ready to be taken down, one at a time, so we don't have issues with operations. And then avoid, obviously, the extra cost of putting some temporary measures in place. As a result, carry became a priority for us in chiller space the next year, and we've since upgraded both those chillers. We also use compressors quite a bit in our facilities, fans. Those things get a lot of attention from us in infrastructure space because they're typically pretty important to us. Mentioned the roll-up door on the bottom left there and the reliable power project in the top left. When we get a chance, we use Construction Craft and others to paint, to provide beautification, if you will, provide an opportunity to make our place of work compelling for our employees. And all of that also leads to addressing housekeeping items, things like that, which ultimately leads to safety of our employees. So those things are important to us, and when we get a chance, we try to expend what additional infrastructure money we have on things like that. In this case, the assembly building attached to 105 Kilo, basically resurfacing that with paint. All right, so those are the things that we've been doing. How do we decide what to do and what order we do it in? So typically, what I'll tell you is we've got a very formal process for evaluating the needs of our infrastructure. It typically starts at a facility level. The actual facilities utilize a series of steps and processes that they go through to assess the health of their systems, of their equipment, and that feeds into a risk register. And between the system health of their systems and the risk register, they formulate a list of things they want to go do and when they want to go do them, when they think they need to go do them. That feeds an EMO level or nuclear materials level infrastructure plan. That plan is typically approved by the department every year. And someone at my level, along with someone on the department's side of the house, will approve it. Will typically has a very specific set of things we want to do for that year. That's usually incentivized through performance-based incentives. And then we usually, in this case, we outline it's 5 to 6 years of additional scope over the course of the next 5 or 6 years that we are anticipating we will need from an infrastructure perspective. So that gives the department and us the ability to kind of forecast what kind of funds we'll need to support that additional scope. The EMO level infrastructure plan feeds up to a site level where we have master infrastructure lists and other documents that ultimately carry forward the overall site's needs from infrastructure perspective. But it's very formal, regimented, risk-based approach. So I wanted to close by just sharing that I feel the process we have works well. We partner with the department on a regular basis to make sure we know and they know what our needs are in infrastructure space. There are a number of challenges we face year over year. We don't have a lot of control over a lot of the supply chain issues that we face or the industry faces. But we have a plan in place, and we ultimately follow that plan to make sure that we have the right infrastructure done in the right order. And overall, I think we've demonstrated a measure of success in making sure that our systems remain operational. Over time, as the facilities age, that list will grow, the demand will increase. But we'll continue to work with our department officials to make sure that we're discussing the risk and conducting the work in the manner that it needs to be conducted in with regards to priority of infrastructure investments. That was it. Pending questions.
The table. Let's start with Narinder.
Narinder Malak CAB. Thank you for the presentation. I understand that a lot of roof work is going on and the building's maintenance. Do you consider putting solar panels as a part of the green energy on the roofs too?
So what I will say is the manner in which we do our roofs, we're required, based on what occupancy is in that building, to determine whether that roof needs to be a cool roof or not. So that process does take effect, and any roof we put on a new building has to meet that requirement. Now, as it relates to solar panels, I can't speak to that. I don't know if there's anything we've specifically discussed, although we're in the process of doing other green-related matters like electric vehicles, things like that. I'm not sure what discussions we've had about solar panels on roofs. Certainly, there's some roofs you would not want to do that with, but there's others that you certainly could do that with. I think it's more a matter of investment. How much do you want to spend on that relative to the actual need for the infrastructure? But I don't know if I can speak to specifically whether we talked about that or not.
How about the interior lighting? Do you use the latest energy efficient lighting system?
Whenever we install something new, we're required to follow the current code and regulations. So yes, the answer is yes.
Thank you.
All right. Sade?
And thank you for that context. I was curious about the process for deciding what infrastructure improvements are needed. And you stated that there is like a formalized system. I'm curious about when that system was developed and how often is that system assessed for improvement for the decision-making process?
I've been on the site since 2014. It's been present since I've been there. We've always had a prioritization process for determining what infrastructure investments we make. It's taken, it's ebbed and flowed with respect to formality and or documentation over the years. Now, as far as how we assess it, I do think we have, we internally obviously evaluate our process on a regular basis to make sure it's effective. We have contractor assurance systems and things like that to make sure, for example, the chillers in H Canyon, when that happened, we sat down and we did a thorough investigation. Hey, did we not do something right with respect to PMs? What was the real reason for the early failure, premature failure? And whatever lessons learned we pull from that, we flow back into the process. As it relates to the overall process, I think that's more just getting the right people in a room and managing and making sure we're following what we think is the right approach. I'm not sure we have anything at a site level. I don't want to speak to that as far as evaluating the actual process of how we determine what infrastructure takes place. We just have the process we have and we follow it.
Yeah.
Okay. Jim?
There we go. Spare parts, you must have a fairly significant amount of spare parts. So my question is, how big is that inventory, and how do you go about determining what should be spared and kept on stock?
Great question. Yes, so that's an integral part of obviously our both maintaining our system operability as well as feeding into our infrastructure investments year over year. We have systems in place for minimum number of quantity of specific parts. So our engineering organization comes together and determines which are critical parts, which are not, which are hard to get, which are not. And from there, they develop a plan that basically outlines what our minimum quantities of each of our spare parts needs to be. And then our procurement process takes effect. Because anytime it comes, we have a part that goes below a certain number, they will automatically order parts. We have thousands of spare parts on site. That's a huge entity in and of itself, is managing our stores and all the parts that we have. I will say in EM specifically, we haven't had that much of a problem getting individualized parts for processing. Typically, we're able to start out far enough in advance, especially for our infrastructure investments. Don't get me wrong, some parts take a year to get, but we typically start far enough out to know that we need a year, and by the time we actually need it, it's here. Doesn't go that way every time, but we're typically pretty good at that.
And that, most of that drives off what you estimate is the useful life of the part?
Repeat that question?
Yeah, when calculating when and how much in terms of spares, you've got to know how long you expect that part to last, when you will need to replace it.
Yes. Yeah, so that's part of the system health evaluation that our engineering technical staff does. You know, every 6 months, every year, they're required to brief out basically a system health report to each of the facility management teams on every system has to have that look. And as part of that review, they're looking at their spare parts inventories as well as indicators of failure and various other things to feed that information back to the facility management team so they can then make a proper informed decision on what priorities we do in infrastructure investment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Shawnee, did you have a follow-up and I cut you off?
No, thank
Okay,
you.
I was just checking because your car was, that's okay. I always like to go back. Charles?
Charles Hilton, CAB. Could you go to slide 5? This may be an unfair question because it's not necessarily dealing strictly with infrastructure, but I couldn't help but to notice in the L area, we're going to be receiving and storing spent nuclear fuel through anticipated 2040, but we're going to shut down H in 2034. What are we going to do with all that stuff?
So,
You know, I'm a native South Carolinian. I want the stuff out of here.
here's my answer to you. So the 2040 is based upon the current agreements we have in place, which I don't think goes out to 2040. James, help me. I think it's early 2030s. Right now we have formal agreement with Oak Ridge and some of our domestic research reactor partners. I do think we have some plans to receive foreign research reactor fuel into the early 2030s. This really was intended to drive a thought of once you receive it, it has to sit here for a period of time before we can send it through the canyon. All that to say, we're in the process of trying to determine and inform our partners in the department based on the new ABD mission in accelerating L basin de-inventory. What are the dates that we would recommend? You know, if you continue to receive past this date, you will not be able to send that material through the canyon. And so we actually have a commitment to the customer this year to provide them a system plan that walks through all those details. And at that point, our plan is to then sit down with the customer and talk through decision-making process. You know, how far out do we receive? What are the impacts of not receiving to all those research reactors that now no longer have a spot to put their fuel in? So I don't know if I answered your question.
I hope a lot of people are looking at those two dates.
I think Mike Budney would like to follow up.
Okay.
Yeah, so follow up on a couple of questions. First, back to your question on the infrastructure plans and how we decide what, there is actually a site-wide process that SRS runs. They incorporate both the program stuff they do that we're talking about here and the indirect funded common infrastructure items. And it's all a risk-based analysis about, hey, if this component fails, you know, how much is it going to impact our operation? When it comes to common infrastructure, it's how is it going to impact site-wide functions? You know, if we lose the ability to pump water from the river, how many programs is that? What's the chances that would happen? How many programs are affected by that? And so that's why that one rose to the top of the list, and we're down there replacing transformers and the switchgear for all that pumping facilities. So we ensure that operates well into the future. So SRNS does run a site-wide program for that. And each contractors run something inside their lifelines in the mission area to prioritize based on risk which infrastructure projects they fund first. In relation to Charles' question about the 2040 thing, so the reason we implemented the Accelerated Basin Inventory Program was because, as you know, the liquid waste program is going to end at some point, and we don't have the ability, as currently configured, we wouldn't have the ability to operate the canyon. So the objective for ABD is to get the inventory in L Basin as low as we can before that date arrives. Meanwhile, the headquarters is running a DOE-wide study to figure out what the needs are to be able to process various kinds of nuclear materials in the future. So what we want to do is get the L-base inventory down low enough so that we can continue to receive material while they're putting into place whatever the decision is going to be on a post-liquid waste, post-H Canyon environment. We don't know the answer to that yet, but in response, yes, there are a large number of people looking at this to figure out what we do going forward when we don't have the canyon anymore. Because, you know, there's a law that says you got to maintain the canyon open. So before we can we would go to Congress to suggest that we can't meet that law. We're looking to figure out what the next plan is. So more to follow on that one. But it's not just an EM issue. It's a department-wide issue that we're working on.
Another question, if you'll go to slide 7. H area failing caustic header. I'm assuming the 12, 18-inch pipe, whatever, is supposedly the header. I don't know what I'm looking at. I hope I'm not looking at sodium hydroxide flaked out on that header, because if it is, it's pouring.
No, that's the painted surface on the exterior of the pipe. We've actually since repurposed a separate header, and this issue is no longer an issue. On occasion, we would have a drip leak, and over time, we had 2 or 3 of those, and it was time to basically repurpose redo the entire header so that we use newer pipe.
Thank you.
Candace?
Candace CAB. I guess my question is kind of related to yours, Charles. So I had questions about the painting. You were talking about the painting in the K area. How often are you painting? Is this like an everyday thing? And I know you said, aesthetically pleasing, but I'm sure it has to do with the rust and preventing rust and things like that. But how often are you painting at SRS? And do you have to paint like the tanks? Do they need to be painted as well?
So the tanks in our facilities typically are not painted. They're typically made of a robust stainless steel material that's regularly ultrasonically tested, those sorts of things. We try not to paint those kinds of surfaces. You're absolutely right with regards to painting. It's an everyday occurrence, typically. We've got painters on staff typically painting something to make sure that for example, here recently we went through and painted all our yellow lines for all our surfaces from a safety perspective, all our walkways. That happens on a occasional basis. But it's, we've got folks on staff who are painting just about every day.
Okay. And John?
John Thomas, CAB. When I was working, I had the capability to visit the Seabrook nuclear power plant in New Hampshire, and they would run around with a red dot envelope for an emergency requisition. It was physically an envelope they ran around. So my question to you, since I come out of software, is this an automated system for procurement and establishing the reorder points as well as the failure risks? Is that automated analysis?
Yes. Short answer is yes.
Okay.
Both with regards to how we reorder material and the evaluation of the viability and obsolescence of our equipment is all automated.
Okay, thanks.
Candace, did you have more? That's a no. All right. Anything else from around the table, folks? Any questions, comments, concerns? Things you want to share? Nick, great job. Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
thank you for your time.
All right. So we've got some board business that we need to take care of today. We've got 2 recommendations, and they're 2 different types of recommendations, and then our operating procedures. So going back to front, there's the operating procedures. That's what we're going to talk about last today. There's the draft recommendation. This is a format that most of you folks are used to seeing by now. And then this is a EMSSAB chair's recommendation. It should be in the top of your packet. It has a lot of location names in green at the top. That's what we're going to talk about first. And I'm calling it out and drawing attention to it because this is unusual for us. We don't always have these. These are written by the chairs and the vice chairs of all the DOE EM advisory boards together, the EMSSAB as a whole together. They write these recommendations and send them to all the boards to endorse and approve. That means something very specific for us today, that unlike almost everything else that we do, we cannot wordsmith this. We can talk about it. Greg and Phyllis were part of the discussions in DC. They can answer any questions you may have, but when we vote on this, or when you vote on this, I don't get to cast a vote. When you vote on this, it will be straight up and down as it is. No edits may be made. I don't care if you find a comma out of place. It's staying, okay? That means all of our comments about this are going to be substantive comments about the content, which should be pretty easy because it is a very close facsimile of something you folks have done before and already approved. With that huge asterisk attached to it, Greg, I'm going to ask you to introduce this to the board, please.
All right, thank you, everybody. Greg Murray Cab. As James said, this was something we took up at the EMSSAB, the chairs meeting in Washington, D.C. It was a direct knockoff of what we did here locally for our board. And the EMSSAB group, the chairs group, approved of this as, I guess unanimously, as I recall. They made very limited edits to it. The biggest part of it is you actually, let me see, if you look at the very end, they have a big section about who we are, which is, almost as long as the recommendation is itself. So anyhow, they've passed it and they're sending it back to us to see if we would like to basically sign it. I, of course, am going to advocate us signing it, but it's certainly open to debate and discussion amongst the group.
All right, so this went out in the email about a week or so ago. You've all had the chance to read it. I hope you've taken your chance to do that. Are there any questions, comments, concerns about this draft, this EMSSAB draft recommendation from all the chairs? Even if it's a process question, I'm happy to help out if we can. Nothing? All right. Does everyone know how they plan to vote on this tomorrow? Yeah, we're pretty good. We're solid about it. All right. Phyllis, you were there. Do you have anything that you want to add to this? No? Okay. We're just running a little short. I thought you might want to throw something in for me. No, it's fine. It's fine. Okay. If we know where we stand, if everybody knows where they stand on this one, are we ready to move on to the next one? All right. Let's move on to the next one. This next one was a draft that was discussed at nearly all of the subcommittees last month. This one was also written by Greg because he likes to have a great deal of input on things. But you have great ideas, and you like to share them with us.
I work with a lot of people who give me a lot of good ideas.
Me too. It's a great thing, ain't it?
It is.
Will you go over this one for us?
Sure. This is our recommendation to accelerate disposition of true waste. As we've mentioned, or as James mentioned, we've talked about this. All the subcommittees have read through it and suggested it be passed on to us for final voting on. And the bottom line is that it comes down to the primary gist of it is to accelerate disposition of this legacy true waste from 2030, which is when it is scheduled to be disposed of, to 2027. So that is the gist of the recommendation. And I, again, will support this.
All right, folks. So looking around the table again, I'm going to ask if there are any questions, comments, concerns about this particular draft. Many of you had the opportunity last month to get those questions out, but if anything still lingers or remains, you weren't able to join us in April, please, now is the time to speak. Okay. Everybody know how they plan to vote on this one tomorrow? Yeah? Okay. Moving on then. Let's go down to the operating procedures. Back in September, at one of the chairs' meetings, we were asked to take a look at our operating procedures, make sure that we complied with some of the directives, and for the most part, we did. There was some noodling language we needed to do here and there. We took the opportunity, A&O took the opportunity to go ahead and look at the whole document, see if there were any other changes that needed to be made, any edits. We found a stray comma that was left behind in 2017. We got rid of that. But otherwise, most of this was pretty light. And again, you've all had this in your inbox for a couple of weeks now. You've had the opportunity to review it. I hope you've done so. So we're going to open the floor on this one. Are there any questions, comments, concerns about the operating procedures? Y'all just save the hard questions for when Amy's here? Yeah, Sade, please. Oh, can you pull the microphone down? I'm sorry.
I wanted to be clear about on page 5. Where is it? Page 6. There, in the event that there is a vacancy, it may be filled by an interim appointment. I'm curious about how that would work if a vacancy happened prior to, I guess, trying to address a similar issue. Perhaps what I've experienced and others have, if there is you've made a determination for a board member and they, I guess there's an attrition prior to orientation.
Right.
Is that?
So that's
considered
actually a
vacancy?
really awkward question. So if there's, if an appointment has been made but not accepted, let's go over that one first. That position pretty much goes away for the year. We'll just know that instead of 25 or whatever our number, we're going to be at 24. If an appointment is made by headquarters, that individual accepts the appointment and then resigns, we are able to do a field appointment in that. And that is more or less a temporary appointment. So Mike Budney will write a letter appointing that person for a year, and then they'll actually go through a full appointment process, that full 1.5 year long review through headquarters in order to get a full 2-year term. It may sound like that person's going to get shorted, but the answer is no. It'll be a 1-year term, and then a 2-year term, and then a 2-year term, and then 1 year. So for that total of 6 years, and that's how that works.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anything else, folks? Do we all know how we plan to address this tomorrow, how you plan to vote on it? No questions, comments, concerns, discussions?
Did, excuse me, Greg Murray, CAB, did headquarters have any significant suggestions or revisions or anything?
I think for some boards, it may have been a little more of a robust change.
Okay.
For us, we were already there. We were already living the dream.
Yeah.
So all I did was change some of the wording just a little bit in order to make it sound better, but
Okay, good. Thank
we're
you.
not changing our process at all.
Good, thank you.
Candace?
I'm just curious, so how often is the SOP updated? Or was there something that prompted this look into it?
What prompted this look into it is that headquarters request that we make sure that we comply and reapprove and make sure that everybody's on board. And they made this not of us specifically, it was each board needed to open the books and take a look. As far as how often we do this, we tend to do it, I'll say, as needed. I started in 2010. We really didn't do an SOP update until about 2013. We did another one in 17. We're doing another one now. So every few years we crack it open. But if A&O, that's one of the things that Administrative and Outreach Committee is charged with, right? That's the administrative part. If you folks through A&O decide a change needs to be made, that's where we go, is A&O looks at it. Anything else? All right, I'm going to ask one more time. We know how we're going to vote tomorrow. Anything else that we need to talk about today in order to put a bow on this afternoon? Before I ask Greg to not table us out, but the word I'm looking for. Oh my gosh, adjourn for the day. Recess, that's the word. Oh my gosh. Words are hard. Yep, we're going to do, I'm not asking you to do that yet. First thing we need to take care of is we do need to do public comment. And so I haven't had a chance to go back and look at the sign-in sheet. I know that we don't have many here, but I knew that I could look back at Tom and he was going to raise his hand and he's going to fill it in for us. Tom Clements, please, sir, up to the microphone, if you will.
Thanks, James. I'm so predictable, Anyway, my name is Tom Clements, and I'm the director of Savannah Riverside Watch, a small nonprofit environmental organization that monitors Savannah Riverside. I'm based in Columbia, and I have been working on SRS issues one way or the other since the 1970s, mostly full-time since 1989. So I'm quite familiar, have attended, I don't know how many, 50 to 100 CAB and full CAB and committee meetings. So gone through a lot of things. Thank you very much for this opportunity to say a few words. So I've got about 5 things I just mostly want to briefly mention, but I do want to give a little bit more background about the German issue. As many of you know, I've raised this over and over again, particularly in the last 6 months. It has been such a struggle to get the Department of Energy to live up to a commitment made under the National Environmental Policy Act, the FONSI, the Finding of No Significant Impact, where you would be updated and the public would be updated. You have not been updated until now, and I'm very appreciative that you finally got that update. I have been updating you off and on since 2012, when it was first revealed about this plan to import the German spent fuel. I don't know if you can see this, but these are the canisters, big casks that have about 290,000 graphite balls in them, 152 casks at one site, and there's another grouping of 305 of these caster casks at another site. So we're mostly talking about the 152 at the Jülich site in western Germany near the Dutch border. I've been in this facility. I've actually touched one of these casks. You may think me foolish because it's high-level waste, but I wanted to go in there and see what we're talking about, and I've been to this site twice about the materials. So you can find more information in a news release. I put an end over here. Here, as I was just holding up, this is the actual presentation by Jen, and the J stands for Jülich, which is the city, where they basically say that this project has ended. And getting DOE to say anything about it it's taken a lot of hard work. This was elevated in headquarters on April 25th. So it's trickled down. We've gotten the update that you guys deserved, because you were the ones who passed a recommendation related to this material. So I'm going to leave it at that, except to say, please take one of these news releases. You can link to srswatch.org to get a lot more information about the German issue, and I'm going to continue to track it and continue to be in touch with German politicians and German environmental folks to see if this finally really is dead. Just a few other brief things concerning H Canyon. Charles, that was a great question. What happens next? Once the canyon may be out of operation or the tanks are out of operation. I wonder about that as well. I was in DC a couple of weeks ago for a week, so raised that in various meetings with agencies. The GAO is going to release a report on the H Canyon at the end of this year, and I think that was mentioned to you a meeting or two ago, and they have talked to people here. They talked to the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board. I have a feeling that report might hint at what happens once the accelerated basin de-inventory happens. I've got some idea of some of the things they're looking at, but we'll see if the GAO thinks they can say more about what happens after the tanks may be closed. Mentioning the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, some of you may know that they were here last week, all week. I had the pleasure of meeting with them in Washington a couple of weeks ago and also in Aiken a week ago today. And I must say that agency is a wonderful agency. It's only like 120 or 30 employees, but thank goodness they're there. We've had to fight for them. DOE tried to push down their access to facilities and access to information, but that was a couple of years ago. We're through that. I think things have been worked out okay. My alliance, called the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, we're the grassroots groups around many of the DOE sites, and the other sites are actually more active than here. And we will stand up and fight with members of Congress to get them funded if it comes to that again. They are looking at the tritium operations, which you don't cover, high-level waste, status of the H Canyon, the pit plant design. So I look forward to any future reports that they or their resident inspectors at the site might issue concerning what they're up to, particularly in response to their site visit. One thing I request that you be attentive to, and this is an overlap issue between NNSA and EM, the facility at Los Alamos, which produces plutonium oxide, which would be shipped all the way here for the plutonium downblending program. It's called ARES. ARES, DOE is looking at possibly relocating ARES to Savannah River Site. A report on this was required by Congress several years ago. I had a Freedom of Information Act request well over 2 years ago. They still have not responded, and that is the story generally with Freedom of Information Act requests to the public. It's a sad situation. But I think we're going to get more information about the possibility of where that facility would be located for the plutonium downblending operation, which is NNSA and EM plutonium. Keep your eyes open to that, but if it were moved here, for all the good and bad, at least there wouldn't be that leg of plutonium oxide shipment all the way across the country from Los Alamos. So I think I'm going to leave it at that, except to say one of the biggest things I picked up in Washington was how the funding for the plutonium pit production for new nuclear weapons initially, unfortunately, is going to impact things. The DOE EM liability is hundreds of billions of dollars. SRS, I don't know, 60 billion plus. The pit project is going to impact things. So you always pay attention to the budget and make comments about it. I'm afraid it's going to have severe impact on EM funding in the future. The liability actually sometimes is going up faster than the actual funding amount. So this is going to be a real problem for you guys to deal with and the other sites as well. But thanks very much for paying attention to that and asking DOE a lot of questions about is a commitment going to be made to clean up SRS. Thank you.
Does anyone else in the audience wish to make a public comment this afternoon? All right, a couple of housekeeping items before we go. One is that Charleston and North Charleston are both known for their food. So if you have a bad dinner tonight, it's your fault. There are lots of wonderful places here, and I hope that you take advantage of it this afternoon and find some place to go. Speaking of going, before you take off, all of you need to meet just outside of this doors for a group photograph. Audrey, will you hold your camera up really high for us? You're going to follow Audrey with this camera. Wherever she tells you to go, and you're going to stand where she tells you to stand, and she's going to take like 4 or 5 dozen photos, and then you'll be free to go, except for those of you who wish to participate in the ANO meeting. After the photograph, if you'll meet us in the boardroom over there, and we'll have your ANO meeting this afternoon, okay? Any questions before we recess? We're meeting where? Right out there in the hallway, right? The lack of enthusiastic response for that was troubling. All board members will be meeting right outside of those doors. You're going to follow Audrey, and she's going to take a photo. All right, thank you. Would you like to recess, Rick?
All right, everybody, remember tomorrow morning, get ready, gather about 8:30. Meeting starts at 9 o'clock. Thank you for a good afternoon, and let's go get our pictures taken.